1989 was a good year for sporty biking. Kawasaki's GPX 750 Caterpillar emerged from its chrysalis as the fully formed ultra-aggressive and hard-as-nails ZXR 750. They also launched the almost as aggressive, hard-as-nails 250cc two-stroke KR1. Suzuki gave us the GSXR 1100 Ka modern update on the too much power, not enough tires concept that we thought the Japanese had forgotten, and Yamaha gave us a trio of belters. First up was the limited edition FZR 750 ROW01, a race-ready superbike that was road legal, but only just rideable and cost almost twice as much as the ZXR 750. Then there was the FZR600, a proper headbanger sports bike for the masses, and the FZR1000R, a serious update of 1987's FZR1000 that pretty much set the formula for sports bikes still being followed today. The new FZR1000R took Yamaha's Genesis concept one step further with a sculpted, alloy frame that looked just like the GP bike and Suzuka racers. The 5-valve per-cylinder, 1002cc motor gained a few more bhp, but more importantly a whole load more flexibility through some serious engine tuning and a gizmo called EXUP that turned the bike's exhaust system into both a race pipe and a road pipe in just one unit. EXUP, or Exhaust Ultimate Power Valve, was a sort of 4-stroke version of the YPVS system Yamaha had used in their 2 strokes for a while. The valve in the exhaust stayed shut at low revs, increasing back pressure and boosting power. At higher revs, a servo motor opened the valve, turning the exhaust into a free-flowing race pipe, allowing impressive peak power figures from an engine with strong mid-range too. In standard unrestricted trim, the new FZR made around 130 bhp at the crank and 125 bhp at the back wheel. For some European markets, Yamaha restricted the output by fitting rubber webs across the carb manifolds. We got a 125 bhp version, while France and Germany got 100 bhp and poor old Swiss riders got just 70 bhp. Thankfully, all it needed was a Stanley knife and half a day to get the tank, airbox and carbs off and on again. FZR feels low-slung and tail-heavy, but that was how bikes were back then. A seat height of 763 mm was about normal for a sports bike of the time. Kawasaki's ZXR 750 sat 760 mm tall. Suzuki's GSXR 750 was 780 mm, and even Honda's, not exactly shabby RC30 was 785 mm. Interestingly, the GSXR 1100K's seat height was 50 mm higher than the FZR and similar to a modern sports bike. And yet the Yamaha ran rings around the Suzuki, according to the superheroes of Super Fast Performance Bike magazine, mostly because the GSXR was running geometry and suspension designed for tires that hadn't been invented yet. By the time most of us could afford one a few years later, the GSXR's handling reputation was shot to pieces, and most of the FZRs had been stolen and recovered or were sitting even lower at the back as the not quite quality enough rear shock gave up the ghost after a single summer. This lack of build quality meant that almost all of us who owned one never got to experience the FZR's true genius when new, which is why 29 years on, they don't have the collectible value of the GSXR, which actually got less terrifying and dangerous as tire technology caught up with the chassis. The ultimate irony was that sports bikes evolved to be more like the GSXR than the FZR in many ways. The Suzuki had plenty of power, in a more peaky engine, delivered through a short, sharp chassis on first-generation radial tires that were a long way from good enough. I rode a well-looked-after GSXR 1100K a few years back on modern tires, and it handled well for an old bike. In comparison, an FZR 1000R these days feels long, low and difficult to steer. It doesn't take too much to sort the Yamaha out: a decent replacement shock, fresh fork oil, modern rubber, and a brake overhaul can turn a 1,500 pounds hound into a 2,000 pounds hound that handles. Thing is, you can still buy a mid-90s Fireblade for the same money which runs rings around the FZR. Dealers are starting to ask speculative prices for early EXUPs, but most of the later models are still bumping along the bottom like the stopgap Thunderace that replaced it. Don't forget that many of those 1989 bikes were stolen and recovered. The FZR EXUP almost single-handedly caused an insurance crisis in 1991, and be wary of anything with race replica paint and a polished frame, because you have to strip the whole bike to polish a frame, and why would you do that unless you had to? If you really must, then make sure they didn't accidentally polish out the original frame number at the same time.